My name is Julia Ferry, and I will never forget 10:07 that morning. It was such an ordinary hour, printed on the glowing screen of my phone like any other notification, yet what it carried was anything but ordinary. A call, a male voice, calm, too calm, and in an instant my entire day, my entire life, was emptied of something I couldn't name. It was as if someone had opened a window in my chest, letting all the warmth escape and filling me only with cold. My mother, Rosa Ferry, had been found collapsed near a gas station, in the middle of a snowstorm, with no coat, no shoes, and bruises scattered across her skin like black flowers blooming on a winter night. The officer's voice told me she was alive, that she was breathing, that she was conscious, but the words felt hollow, sliding past me as though they belonged to another life. The real blow struck only after she hadn't been abandoned by strangers. She had been left there by my own brother, Lorenzo, and his wife, Martina. I stood frozen in my small apartment in Minneapolis, my fingers still hovering over the keyboard, half finished with a dull legal email that seemed to belong to someone else's world. The snow outside was pressed against the windows like an animal desperate to get in, while somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of a passing car brushed against the edges of my silence. But inside me, something more feral stirred, an ache so deep it felt like a scream building inside my bones. The officer kept speaking, explaining details, asking questions, but all I could hear was the echo of my mother's name inside my head, Rosa. Rosa! Rosa! She had always been a shield, fragile but unbreakable in her devotion to us, even when that devotion demanded lies. I remember the excuses she invented for Lorenzo when his temper flared, the way she hid bruises under long sleeves, the way she smiled at neighbors so they wouldn't guess what shadows lived inside our home. And now the lie had shattered. She had been left in the snow, abandoned by the very son she had once cradled, protected, forgiven. What do you do when the people who raised you are the ones you must protect yourself from? I had spent years building distance, moving 200 miles away, creating a life so carefully sanitized that it could pass for normal. My colleagues saw me as composed, successful, maybe even a little cold. None of them knew how many nights I had stayed awake listening for footsteps in the hall as a child, or how many times I had dreamed of running away. But running away had never been enough. The past was like the snow pressing against my window, relentless, waiting for a crack to seep through. At 10:07 that morning, the crack had widened into a chasm. I could feel it in my chest, in the way my hands trembled, in the way my breath caught in my throat. The silence of the apartment no longer felt safe. It felt accusing, as though it had always known I could not escape forever. Somewhere, miles away, my mother lay broken in the snow, and I was here, surrounded by ordinary things, books, coffee mugs, unfinished work, that suddenly looked like props in a stranger's life. I thought of her voice, of the lullabies she hummed even when her body ached, of the way she said my name when I was small, soft and almost secret. I thought of Lorenzo, too, and the bitter twist in his smile, the way anger always lurked behind his charm. And Martina with her cold eyes and calculating silences. Together, they had left my mother to die. I should have cried, but no tears came. Instead, a silence heavier than grief filled me, sharper than rage. It was the silence of realization, of inevitability. I knew then what I had to do. My life, so carefully crafted and distant, had just turned toward a road I had sworn never to walk again. The snowstorm outside was no longer a backdrop. It was a map, a demand, a reminder that home was calling me back. Back to secrets, back to shadows, back to the truth I had avoided for so long. And as I packed my bag with hands that shook but would not stop, I understood one thing clearly. This was not just about saving my mother. This was about finally facing what I had spent my entire life trying to outrun. The drive back to my hometown felt like moving through a tunnel of ghosts. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, but every mile I crossed only pulled me deeper into memories I had tried to bury. Snow lashed against the windshield in swirling sheets, and the wipers beat frantically, like a heart that knew it was racing toward danger. With every flicker of white, images from the past flashed across my mind. My mother standing in the kitchen, her hands red from washing, pretending not to notice the argument erupting in the living room. My brother's voice, sharp and cruel, slicing through the air, and me, always shrinking into corners, clutching silence as if it could shield me. But silence had never been a shield. It had been a prison. And now, as the car carried me closer to that old house at the edge of town, I felt the weight of those walls pressing against me again, long before I could even see them. When I finally pulled into the cracked driveway of my childhood home, the world around me seemed frozen in time. The house loomed like a scar on the landscape, its windows dark, its paint peeling, its roof sagging under the weight of too many winters. Every creak of the door as I pushed it open echoed like an unwelcome memory. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of neglect, but beneath it lingered something sharper, something that smelled of betrayal and fear. My mother was sitting on the faded couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes staring into a distance that no one else could see. She looked smaller, diminished, like the years had folded her into herself. But when she turned toward me, for just a second, I saw the mother I remembered, the one who sang softly as she braided my hair, the one who whispered stories to me when I couldn't sleep. And then her face collapsed back into weariness, into the shadow of what had been done to her. "Julia," she whispered, her voice so thin it almost broke me. "You came back." I knelt beside her, taking her cold hands into mine. "Of course I came back. I'll never leave you again." The words were a promise, but even as I spoke them, I wondered if I could keep it. Because this house, this town, this family, it wasn't just a place. It was a trap, and I had spent half my life running from it. Lorenzo wasn't there, but his presence lingered like poison in the walls. I could feel him in the dents on the table where his fists had struck, in the broken frame hanging crooked in the hallway, in the silence that fell every time his name was spoken. Martina, too, had left her mark. Cold perfume lingered in the air, sharp and chemical, a reminder that cruelty sometimes wore elegance like a mask. My mother tried to explain what had happened. Her voice trembled as she spoke of the night Lorenzo and Martina had driven her out of the car, leaving her in the storm. She remembered the snow biting her skin, the way her feet sank into the frozen ground, the headlights disappearing into the distance as she stumbled alone into the blizzard. She didn't remember how she got to the gas station, only that somehow, someone had found her. Every word pierced me deeper. I wanted to scream, to shatter the silence that hung between us, but instead I sat still, listening, my heart pounding with a rage that had nowhere to go. When she finished, she looked at me with eyes that were both pleading and apologizing. "Don't hate him," she said softly, almost begging. "He's still your brother." I wanted to tell her that he had stopped being my brother long ago, that what he had done was unforgivable, that love had limits, and he had crossed them. But looking at her, fragile and broken, I couldn't. She had built her life on forgiveness, even when it destroyed her. And who was I to take that away from her now? So I just held her hand tighter, swallowing the storm inside me. Outside, the snow beat harder against the windows, as though the world itself was echoing the chaos within me. I knew then that this was only the beginning. Coming back hadn't healed anything, it had ripped the wound wide open. And as the night deepened, shadows crawling across the room, I realized something terrifying. The house wasn't empty. Secrets lived here still, hidden in the walls, waiting for me. And I was no longer sure if I had come back to save my mother, or if I had come back to face the darkness I had always feared. The next morning broke with a heavy sky, the kind that promised another storm. The gray light seeped through the torn curtains, painting everything in shades of sorrow. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the chipped ceramic mug in front of me, though I hadn't taken a sip of the coffee that had long since gone cold. My mother moved slowly around the room, her body hunched, each movement betraying years of exhaustion. It was like watching a ghost drift through a house that belonged more to the past than the present. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, loud and deliberate, like it was counting down to something I couldn't yet name. Every sound in the house was amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the whistle of the wind through the cracks, even my mother's shallow breaths. It all felt like a warning, though I couldn't decipher what for. As I sat there, I couldn't help but think about Lorenzo. Memories of him stormed into my mind uninvited, bringing with them a bitterness that clung to my chest. I remembered when we were children, running through the fields behind the house, our laughter echoing under the wide sky. There was a time when he was just my brother, before cruelty had etched itself into his bones, before Martina had tightened her grip on him. But those moments felt like they belonged to another life, one I could no longer touch. The man he had become was a stranger, violent, manipulative, hollow. His anger was a weapon, and everyone around him lived in fear of when it might be turned on them. And yet, my mother still defended him, still spoke his name like it was sacred. "He's still your brother," she had said. But how could blood outweigh betrayal? How could family excuse cruelty? My thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, crunching against the frozen ground. I stiffened, my eyes darting toward the door. My mother froze too, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the counter. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then a knock. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the house like gunshots. I felt my stomach twist. My mother's eyes met mine, wide and fearful, and in that silent exchange I knew who it must be. I stood, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked toward the door with a heaviness in my legs. My hand hovered over the knob, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I opened it, the cold air rushed in, biting at my skin. And there he was, Lorenzo. He looked older, harsher, his face weathered by years of bitterness. His eyes, once so full of mischief, now carried a darkness that made my chest tighten. He didn't smile. He just stood there, his presence filling the doorway like a shadow that refused to move. "Julia," he said, his voice rough, like gravel. "You came back." The sound of his voice made something inside me recoil. I wanted to slam the door, to shut him out of his house, out of my life. But my mother's fragile voice drifted from behind me. "Lorenzo!" She said his name like a prayer, like an absolution, and in that moment I saw the weight of her love, how it bound her even to the son who had broken her. Tears welled in her eyes as she took a step toward him, her body trembling. I wanted to scream at her not to remind her of everything he had done, of the night he left her in the snow to die. But she didn't see the monster I saw. She saw her son, the boy she had raised, the boy she still believed existed somewhere under all that darkness. Lorenzo's gaze shifted to me, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, regret, maybe, or guilt. But it vanished quickly, replaced by that same cold emptiness. "We need to talk," he said. The words hung in the air like a threat. I felt my throat tighten, my hands curl into fists. I wanted nothing more than to tell him there was nothing left to say, that the bridge between us had burned long ago. But I knew this wasn't something I could run from. Not anymore. So I stepped aside, letting him enter. As he crossed the threshold, a chill swept through the house, colder than the winter storm outside. I knew then that whatever was coming would tear us apart, or consume us whole. And as the door closed behind him, sealing us together in that suffocating house, I realized the past wasn't just knocking, it had come inside. The room seemed smaller with Lorenzo inside it. His presence was like smoke, thick and suffocating, filling every corner until there was no air left to breathe. He moved slowly, his boots thudding against the wooden floor with a weight that made the old boards groan in protest. My mother hovered near him, her hands twisting in the fabric of her apron, her eyes darting between us like she was caught between 2 storms. I stood by the table, gripping the edge, so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every muscle in my body was tense, ready to spring, ready to defend. I didn't trust him, not with his eyes so sharp, his movements so deliberate, his silence carrying more threat than words ever could. He looked around the room like it wasn't home anymore, like it was some relic of a past he had outgrown. His gaze lingered on the faded photographs on the wall, the ones of us as children. For a flicker of a moment, his jaw tightened, but the emotion passed as quickly as it came. "You let it rot," he finally said, his voice low and cutting. The words stabbed through the air. My mother flinched, but I straightened, my anger flaring hotter than fear. "We kept it alive," I snapped, surprising even myself with the sharpness of my tone. "While you were gone, while you turned your back on all of us, we were the ones who stayed. Don't you dare stand there and talk about rot." Lorenzo's eyes locked on mine, cold and unblinking. There was something dangerous in his stillness, like a predator waiting to strike. For a heartbeat, I thought he would lash out, that he would shatter the fragile quiet with violence. But instead, he smirked, a thin, cruel curve of his lips that made my stomach twist. You always were the loud one, he said. Always my chest heavy, memory. The nights I had cried myself to sleep because of his words. The shadows that lingered. He had always known how to break me, and even now, years later, as far as he knows it, I wasn't that girl. I lifted my chin and closer to his face. It matters now. The silence that followed. My mother's hands trembled as she reached me, touching my arm as she felt the story. Don't start like this. We're family. Family. The word hung between us like a fragile thread, one I no longer believed in. Family wasn't supposed to hurt, to abandon, to betray. Family wasn't supposed to leave scars that never healed. And yet, for my mother, the word was still sacred, still strong enough to excuse the unforgivable. Lorenzo didn't respond. Instead, he stepped further into the kitchen, brushing past me as though I wasn't even there. The air shifted with his movement, cold and sharp, and I had to resist the urge to recoil. He dropped into the chair across from where I had been sitting, his movements deliberate, calculated. "We need to talk," he said again, his tone flat, as though it was inevitable, as though my choice in the matter had been erased the moment he walked through the door. I didn't move. My heart pounded, my mind screaming for me to run, to fight, to do anything but sit across from the man who had turned my life into a battlefield. But my mother's pleading eyes anchored me in place. She needed me here, even if it tore me apart. So I sat down, each second heavy with dread. Lorenzo leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his eyes burning into mine. "You think you know what happened," he said, his voice low, steady. "But you don't. You never did." A chill crawled down my spine. His words carried more than accusation. They carried a promise, a warning that everything I thought I knew was about to shatter. I wanted to tell him I didn't care, that nothing he said could change what he had done. But deep down, in the part of me I tried so hard to bury, there was a small, trembling fear. What if he was right? What if the story I had built my anger on wasn't the whole truth? The storm outside howled against the walls, the wind rattling the windows like fists pounding to be let in. Inside, the storm between us was just beginning. And I knew, with a certainty that made my chest ache, that whatever words were about to be spoken would change everything. The chair creaked beneath him as he leaned back, his eyes never leaving mine. It was the kind of stare that made you feel like he could see through skin and bone, straight into the fragile core you tried so hard to protect. My mother stood between us, wringing her hands as though her fragile grip on peace could hold back the weight of years of silence, anger, and betrayal. "I didn't come here for your forgiveness," Lorenzo said, his voice sharp but not raised. It was calm in the way that made you more afraid than shouting ever could. "I came because it's time you knew the truth. And whether you want to hear it or not, you'll listen." His certainty burned in me like fire. Who was he to demand anything? He had abandoned us, left us drowning in debts and whispers, left my mother staring out the window at nights, waiting for footsteps that never came. He had stolen more than money. He had stolen peace, childhood, the fragile sense that home was safe. And now he wanted to return, dictating the terms of the story as though he still held the right to it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw every broken memory at him, to make him feel the weight of every wound he left behind. But I didn't. Instead, I sat frozen, caught between rage and the unbearable need to know what he meant. My mother's voice broke the silence first. "Lorenzo, maybe this isn't the time." He cut her off with a glance, sharp as a blade. "It's exactly the time. You've hidden it long enough." "Hidden it?" My pulse quickened. My mother's face drained of color, her lips trembling as though words were fighting to escape but kept being forced back down into the prison of her silence. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw guilt, not the exhaustion of survival, not the weariness of loss, but guilt, heavy and suffocating, clinging to her like another skin. "What is he talking about?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "What have you hidden?" My mother's hands pressed against the table, her shoulders sinking as if the weight of years had finally become too heavy to carry. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look at me. She looked at him, at Lorenzo. And in that look, in that wordless exchange, I saw the truth. She had known all along. Lorenzo leaned forward, his elbows resting on the scarred wood of the table. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper, but each word carried the force of a blow. The night I left, I didn't betray you. I saved you. The air in the room thickened, pressing down on my chest. I shook my head, refusing to let the words find a home in me. Saved us. I spat. You destroyed us. You left us broken. Don't you dare twist it into some kind of noble act. But he didn't flinch. He didn't waver. You think I walked away because I didn't care? His voice sharpened, a rare crack appearing in his mask of control. I walked away because if I had stayed, you wouldn't have survived. The storm outside roared, lightning flashing through the broken shutters, illuminating the hard lines of his face. For a moment, he looked less like a villain and more like a man carrying something far heavier than I could comprehend. My mother reached for me then, her fingers brushing my arm. Her touch was pleading, desperate, like she was begging me not to dig deeper. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't. Survived what? I demanded, my voice trembling now. What the hell are you talking about? Lorenzo's eyes softened, not with kindness, but with pity. The enemy wasn't me. It never was. I became the monster, so you didn't have to see the real one. The words hit me harder than any slap could. My breath caught, my chest aching with the weight of confusion, anger, and something I hated to admit, fear. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Whatever truth Lorenzo was about to reveal, it wasn't going to destroy him. It was going to destroy everything I thought I knew about my family, my home, and the life I had been desperately trying to protect. And once the truth was spoken, there would be no going back. The storm outside seemed to answer before he did, thunder splitting the sky as though nature itself wanted to warn me to stop asking questions. But I couldn't stop. The hunger for the truth burned hotter than fear. My fists clenched against the table, nails digging into my palms until pain grounded me in that moment. You talk in riddles, I snapped, my voice louder than I expected. If you want me to believe you, then speak plainly. No more half-truths, no more shadows. What enemy? What did you save us from? Lorenzo's gaze drifted to the window, to the sheets of rain hammering against the glass like desperate fingers trying to claw their way inside. His jaw tightened, and for a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he turned back to me, his eyes reflecting the flicker of lightning. You think the debts, the rumors, the whispers about betrayal were mine to bear alone, he said quietly. You think I left because I was weak? No. I left because there are forces in this town that don't forgive. Men who don't forget. And the only way to keep their hands off you was to give them me. The room tilted. My breath grew ragged, as though his words had stolen the air itself. I looked at my mother, searching for denial, for anger, for some kind of rejection of the poison he was pouring into the room. But she only lowered her head, her silence screaming louder than any confession. So it's true, I whispered. All those years, you let me believe he was just selfish, reckless, a coward. But you knew, didn't you? Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she reached out again, but this time I pulled away. Her hand fell back into her lap, trembling like a broken wing. Lorenzo leaned forward, the intensity in his stare cutting through the storm's roar. They threatened to take everything. Not just the house, not just the money. They wanted blood. And when a debt like that comes due, you don't pay with coins, you pay with lives. So I gave them mine. His words carved into me like a blade. I wanted to reject them, to scream that he was lying, that this was another manipulation. But deep inside, something shifted. Because the fragments of my childhood, the sudden moves, the unexplained fear in my mother's eyes, the way she locked the doors even in daylight, all of it suddenly made sense. And that truth was worse than any lie. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the relentless pounding of the rain. My heart felt like it was tearing itself apart, pulled between two impossible realities. In one, my father was the villain who abandoned us. In the other, he was a martyr who had sacrificed himself to save us. But which was worse? To be hated or to be misunderstood? You should have told me, I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. You should have trusted me with the truth. My mother sobbed softly, burying her face in her hands. Lorenzo's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened, as though my pain was just another inevitability, another debt that had to be paid. "You were a child," he said flatly. "Children don't carry burdens like this. You wouldn't have survived it." His certainty made me want to scream. "Don't you see? I've carried it anyway. The silence, the absence, the unanswered questions, they've been my burden all along. And now you come back and pretend you can justify it." The storm rattled the shutters, the candlelight flickering wildly across the walls. Shadows twisted like ghosts, reminding me that this house had seen too many secrets, too many sacrifices. Lorenzo's voice dropped to a whisper, almost swallowed by the thunder. "You think you hate me now, but when you know everything, you'll wish you could go back to this moment when you only hated me for leaving." The words chilled me more than the storm's icy wind sneaking through the cracks. Because in his tone, I didn't hear a warning. I heard a promise, and deep in my bones, I realized something terrifying. Whatever truth was still hidden had the power not just to wound us, but to destroy the very foundation of who we were. The storm outside howled, and inside, the storm between us grew stronger, pulling me into a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to survive. The candlelight trembled, throwing restless shadows on the cracked walls, and for the first time since his return, I realized how frail Lorenzo looked. His shoulders were broad but bent beneath an invisible weight, his eyes dark hollows carved by years of running. He was no longer the giant of my childhood, the father who once lifted me high above his head. He was a man broken by choices, haunted by debts, and yet still defiant. I leaned back in my chair, my body shaking though I willed myself to be still. The air in the room was thick, heavy with every unspoken word, and I could feel the truth pressing closer, inching toward me like the storm that rattled the shutters. "Who are they?" I asked finally, the question tasting like ash in my mouth. "The men who wanted your blood, the ones you sold your soul to. Who are they?" For a moment, I thought he would refuse again, just as he had so many times before. But then his lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace, and the look in his eyes told me he knew there was no turning back now. "They call themselves La Fratellanza Nera," he said, his voice low, each word deliberate. "The Black Brotherhood, a name whispered in alleys, carved in debts, sealed in blood. You don't see them in daylight, you don't speak their names aloud, unless you're ready to disappear." The name hung in the air like poison, and my stomach twisted violently. Memories I hadn't realized I kept surfaced. Overheard arguments, my mother's nervous glances at strangers, the way she always pulled me away when shadows grew too long. "And you," my voice cracked, rage and fear mixing inside me until I could barely speak. "You brought them into our lives." Lorenzo slammed his hand against the table, the sound sharp enough to make my mother flinch. "I didn't bring them in," he roared, his face illuminated by a flash of lightning that made him look more like a ghost than every business, every deal, every betrayal. I only survived because I lived from something more. And what was that? I demanded. "Go play with her." His eyes stared at me, and for the first time, I sensed a flash of confidence. Real gift, the kind that even years after your grandfather's land, the inheritance. I tried to say the wind stopped. My mother's face crumpled as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I felt my chest tighten until it hurt to breathe. The betrayal wasn't just about abandonment, it was about blood, about roots, about everything that tied us to this cursed house. "You gave away our future," I hissed. "You sold everything that made us who we are. I saved your lives," Lorenzo shouted back, his voice breaking under the weight of his own desperation. "You think land, wealth, names matter when the alternative is being buried in unmarked graves. I chose survival," but his words rang hollow. Survival wasn't life, it was a prison. And now, sitting across from him, I realized he wasn't free at all. He was still chained to the very monsters he had bargained with. The storm outside screamed, rain battering the glass, as though the world itself wanted to shatter around us. My mother buried her face in her hands, her sobs filling the spaces between our words. I wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but anger burned hotter than grief. "You should have trusted me," I said again, softer this time, though my voice shook. If you had told me the truth, maybe I could have, maybe we could have fought together. But instead, you made me live in lies. You made me hate you. Lorenzo's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the man I once called father. Better that you hate me, he murmured, than you lie in a grave before your time. The storm answered for me, a crash of thunder so loud it shook the house. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The brotherhood wasn't done with us. If Lorenzo had returned, it wasn't out of love. It was because debts don't stay buried. And sooner or later, they would come knocking. The house felt smaller with every word Lorenzo spoke, as if the walls themselves were pulling inward, trapping us inside a cage of our own history. The flickering candlelight was no longer a comfort. It became a cruel reminder that light here was fragile, temporary, and could vanish with the slightest breath. My mother's sobs quieted to a trembling silence, but her red-rimmed eyes stayed fixed on the man she once loved. For me, it wasn't just about listening anymore. It was about surviving what was yet to come. I forced myself to stand, though my knees nearly gave out beneath me. So they'll come for us, I said, my voice sharper than I expected. It's not a question, is it? They'll come to finish what you started. Lorenzo's eyes flickered toward me, then to the window, where lightning slashed the sky like an open wound. He didn't answer, and that silence was worse than any confession. His silence was confirmation. You think we don't know their ways, he muttered finally, his words sounding more like an echo from another life. They don't forget. They don't forgive. The Brotherhood's reach stretches farther than the sea, deeper than any grave. I've seen men vanish in daylight, swallowed by shadows that move like whispers. If I'm here, if I came back, it's not because I wanted to, it's because they left me no choice. The words stabbed through me, but it was my mother who broke first. She pushed away from the table, her hands trembling so violently that the chair clattered against the floor. You brought death to our doorstep, Lorenzo. After all these years of hiding, of trying to give her a chance at a life without fear, you dragged it all back. Her voice cracked under the weight of anguish, but he didn't rise, didn't chase after her. He simply sat there, staring at his scarred hands like they belonged to someone else. I dragged nothing, he said, his voice hollow now. Death has always been here. This house, this family, this blood, it carries a debt none of us can escape. The storm wailed outside, rattling the shutters, but inside, the silence felt heavier than thunder. I wanted to scream, to claw at the walls, to demand answers he had no courage to give. Instead, I found myself whispering the thought I never wanted to speak aloud. Then we're already dead. The words silenced even the storm. My mother froze where she stood, and Lorenzo's head snapped toward me. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes searched mine, desperate, as if begging me to believe in something that no longer existed. Then, his lips parted, and he whispered, "Not if we fight back." The idea struck me like a blade. Fight back! Against them? Against shadows that held the town in its grip, against whispers that could strangle a man before he cried out. It sounded like madness, but in the raw edges of his voice there was a truth that terrified me. He had already decided. "You don't understand," I said, shaking my head, my voice trembling with fury. "You left us with nothing. You think we can stand against a brotherhood that eats families whole? We're just 3 broken souls in a house already cursed." His jaw tightened. "No," he said. "You're wrong. You're stronger than you know. And the brotherhood," his gaze darkened, his hand curling into a fist, "they bleed like men. They die like men. And when the time comes, we will remind them of that." The fire in his words should have ignited something inside me, but instead it left me hollow. My mind raced with questions, with fears, with a future painted only in blood. My mother stood between us, torn between love and loathing, her breath sharp and shallow. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that we were more than victims in this cruel story. But the weight of his choices, of his sins, of the Brotherhood's hunger was crushing. And as lightning tore the sky apart again, illuminating his face in a blaze of white, I couldn't help but see the truth written there. He wasn't offering salvation. He was offering war. And war with the Brotherhood was nothing but a pact with death. That night, sleep was a luxury none of us could afford. The storm outside raged like an omen, shaking the fragile bones of the old villa, while inside, The air was suffocating with unsaid words. I sat in my room, the candle beside me dripping wax that hardened like scars upon the wooden table. My thoughts refused to quiet, each one louder than the thunder that cracked the sky. I thought of my mother, pacing restlessly in her own room, her grief a silent scream echoing through the walls. Every step she took sounded like an accusation hurled at Lorenzo, though she never dared speak his name aloud in anger after their confrontation. It was as if his return had cracked something deep inside her, something she had tried to bury under years of resilience. And then there was Lorenzo himself. I could hear his heavy steps downstairs, the slow drag of boots across the floor, the metallic scrape of something I couldn't identify. He wasn't a father to me. He was a stranger, cloaked in secrets, returned only to remind us of a fate we could never outrun. His voice lingered in my mind. They bleed like men. They die like men. Bold words, yes, but spoken like a man who knew how much blood it would take before the Brotherhood finally fell. The house groaned under the storm's wrath, but it wasn't just the wind that made me shiver. It was the feeling that we weren't alone anymore. As if, beyond the rattling shutters, shadows were watching, waiting. The Brotherhood didn't need to knock. They seeped into your life like rot, silent and unseen, until everything you loved collapsed. I pressed my palms together, praying, though I wasn't sure who I prayed to anymore. If there's mercy left in this world, don't let them find us. Not yet. But even as the words formed, I knew mercy had no place here. Our blood was a debt, and debts are always collected. Hours dragged like years, and somewhere deep in the night, I heard it a whistle. Faint, broken by the storm, but unmistakable. My heart stopped. I rushed to the window, pulling the curtain aside, and there, in the darkness, I saw movement. Figures, no more than shadows, slipping between trees, moving with precision. The Brotherhood had arrived. Panic clawed at my chest. I stumbled back, my breath hitching, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears. "They're here," I whispered to the empty room. But the emptiness didn't last. The door creaked open, and there stood Lorenzo, his face half lit by the candle's dying flame. His eyes locked on mine, steady, unyielding, though there was no mistaking the fear that shadowed them. He had heard it too. He knew what I had seen. "They don't waste time," he muttered, his voice low, gravel scraping against stone. "I told you, they never forget." I wanted to scream at him, to curse him for bringing this upon us, but the words tangled in my throat. My mother's voice rose from the hallway, desperate and broken. "No, no, not tonight. Please, God, not tonight." Lorenzo stepped into the room, closing the door behind him as if to seal us away from the inevitable. He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm but trembling. "Listen to me. Whatever happens, you don't run blindly. You wait for my signal. Do you understand?" I pulled back, glaring at him, my voice cracking with rage. "Your signal? You don't get to command me. You're the reason they're here." His jaw tightened, his hand falling back to his side. "Maybe I am, but I'll be damned if I let them take you. If anyone's blood has to pay tonight, it'll be mine." For a fleeting moment, I saw something human in him, something I didn't want to see. Regret, fear, love, twisted by years of absence and sin. But before I could answer, the whistle came again, closer this time, slicing through the thunder. And then silence. The kind of silence that swallows everything. I knew then, the storm wasn't the enemy. The real storm had just stepped onto our land, cloaked in shadows, hungry for what remained of us. And as I looked into Lorenzo's eyes, I realized the cruelest truth of all. This wasn't the beginning of their arrival. This was the beginning of the end. The silence after the whistle was unbearable. It was as if the entire villa was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to crash through its fragile walls. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the table, wax dripping onto my skin, burning for a moment before hardening like scars. The thunder outside rolled again, but this time it felt weaker, drowned out by the sound of footsteps, measured, deliberate, impossibly close. Lorenzo's face hardened, though his jaw twitched with the weight of the fear he tried to hide. He motioned for me to stay quiet, pressing a finger to his lips. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, scanned the walls as though he could see through them, as if he already knew exactly how many enemies were out there and how long it would take before they made their move. Then came the knock. Not loud, not frantic, calm. Confident. A sound that carried the weight of inevitability. 3 taps, evenly spaced, echoing through the house like a heartbeat. My mother gasped from the hall, clutching her shawl so tightly her knuckles turned white. "No," she whispered. "Not like this." I had never seen her so broken, so powerless. This was a woman who had survived storms, betrayals, years of silence, but the knock on the door unraveled her completely. Her body trembled, and her lips moved silently in prayer, though her eyes betrayed her. She knew prayers would not save us now. Lorenzo stepped forward, his boots striking the wooden floor with a defiance that felt both admirable and foolish. He looked back at us only once, his expression unreadable, then reached for the latch. "Don't," my mother hissed, clutching his arm. Her voice cracked with desperation. "Don't open it. If you let them in, we're finished." His hand froze for a moment, his gaze locking onto hers. The storm of unspoken words between them raged louder than the thunder outside. Regret, bitterness, a love that had curdled into something sharp and dangerous. It was all there, written in the lines of their faces. Finally, he pulled his arm free, his voice a low growl. "If I don't open it, they'll break it down. Better they stay." And the wind howled into the villa, carrying with it the sound of something else. Iron, sharp, metallic. Shadows filled the doorway, tall figures approaching the walls. Their presence the man in front of him. His face was hidden beneath the hood, but his posture he paused just long enough to make us feel small. Then, in a voice of "Lorenzo, we've come to collect what belongs to us." Every syllable dripped with control, with certainty. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Lorenzo straightened, his fists clenched at his sides. "You'll get nothing from me," he said, his voice steady but low. "Not tonight. Not ever." The hooded man tilted his head, almost amused. "Still stubborn, even after all these years. You left us debts, Lorenzo. Debts don't disappear. They only grow. And now, your bloodline pays the interest." His words cut deeper than any blade. My stomach twisted, and I felt the room spin. They weren't just here for Lorenzo, they were here for us. For me. For my mother. I wanted to scream, to tell them to leave us alone, but my voice was trapped in my chest. My mother sank to her knees, clutching her rosary, whispering prayers that were swallowed by the storm. Tears ran down her face, glistening in the candlelight like fragile pearls. Lorenzo didn't flinch. "You'll have to go through me first." The hooded man chuckled, a sound colder than the rain lashing against the shutters. He stepped closer, and for a moment, the candlelight illuminated his mouth, curved in a smile that promised cruelty. "Good," he said softly. "We were hoping you'd say that." In that instant, I understood this was no negotiation. This was the beginning of the reckoning. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that had just entered our home. And as their shadows stretched across the floor, devouring the fragile light of our candles, I knew our lives would never be the same again. The villa's air thickened the moment they stepped inside, their boots crushing the silence with each heavy stride. The flames of the candles wavered as though even the fire feared them. Shadows crawled across the cracked walls, stretching into grotesque shapes that made the house feel less like a home and more like a coffin waiting to close. I clung to the edge of the table, my nails digging into the old wood until they hurt. My chest felt tight, my breaths shallow, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the hooded figures. They were more than men. They were inevitability dressed in flesh, walking ghosts from my father's past. The leader's gaze never left Lorenzo. Though his face was hidden, his presence was enough to command the room. He didn't need to raise his voice when he spoke again. "You had your chance," he said, the words smooth and deliberate, like blades sharpened slowly against stone. "Years ago you made a promise, and tonight that promise is due." Lorenzo's lips pressed into a hard line. His silence wasn't weakness, it was defiance. He wasn't going to beg, not in front of them, not in front of us. But my mother broke. She pushed herself up from the floor, her hands trembling as she reached for Lorenzo's arm. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw and desperate. "Don't do this. Don't fight them. You'll only make it worse." Her words shattered against him like fragile glass against stone. Lorenzo shook her off gently but firmly, his jaw tightening. "Worse." His voice cracked, not with fear, but with rage that had been festering for years. "You think this isn't already the worst? You think bowing to them will save us?" The hooded man chuckled lowly, tilting his head as though watching a predictable play unfold. "Listen to her, Lorenzo. Women are wise when it comes to survival. You, on the other hand, confuse pride for strength. I wanted to scream at them all, to tell the Brotherhood to leave us, to tell Lorenzo to stop provoking them, to tell my mother not to collapse into tears, but my voice was gone, locked somewhere deep in my throat. I felt like a spectator in my own life, chained to the floor while the house burned around me. The men behind the leader began to spread out, filling the corners of the room like smoke, their movements silent but suffocating. One of them brushed past me, and the cold that radiated from him was so sharp it made my teeth chatter. His gloved hand hovered near his belt, where a blade gleamed faintly in the candlelight. Lorenzo finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You want me? Take me. Leave them out of this." The leader's laugh was cruel, humorless. "If only it were that simple. You see, Lorenzo, you are not the only one bound by your sins. Your blood carries your mistakes. Your family carries your debts. And blood," he paused, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, "is always collected." The words cut through me, sharp and merciless. My mother's sobs filled the room, muffled against her trembling hands. She looked at me then, her eyes wide, wet with terror, silently begging me to run, to hide, to disappear. But where could I go? The storm outside was merciless, and the storm inside the villa was worse. Lorenzo took a step forward, his shadow towering against the wall. "You touch them, and I'll make sure you regret ever walking into this house." The Brotherhood didn't flinch. They thrived on threats, they drank them like wine. The leader tilted his head again, as though amused, then gestured to his men. Two of them moved instantly, quick as serpents. One grabbed my mother by the arm, yanking her to her feet with such force she cried out. The sound pierced me like a dagger. The other man stepped toward me, his hand reaching out, slow and deliberate, as though savoring the moment. Something inside me snapped. For so long, I had been paralyzed, trapped in fear, but watching them drag my mother, watching their shadow fall over me, I couldn't stay frozen any longer. My body moved before my mind caught up, a desperate lunge fueled by raw instinct. "Stop!" My voice cracked, but it was loud, raw, filled with every ounce of rage and fear I had buried inside me. The room fell still for a heartbeat, the Brotherhood pausing, their gazes shifting toward me. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. The leader turned slowly, his hidden eyes fixing on me. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. Then, softly, almost with admiration, he said, "There it is. The fire. I was wondering when it would appear." The storm outside roared louder, rattling the windows as though the world itself recognized the shift. Nothing would ever be the same after this moment. The silence after my outburst stretched like a noose tightening around our throats. The Brotherhood stood frozen, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next move. The leader's head tilted ever so slightly, and though I couldn't see his eyes beneath the shadow of his hood, I felt them burning into me, stripping me bare. "Interesting," he murmured, his voice low, dangerous, almost delighted. "So the child has teeth after all." A ripple of laughter spread among the hooded men, cruel and mocking. It crawled over my skin like insects, but instead of shrinking back, I stepped forward, my fists clenched so tightly my nails bit into my palms. I didn't care that my knees were trembling, or that my breath came in jagged gasps. For the first time, I wasn't going to let fear silence me. "You said this is between you and him." I spat, my voice trembling but louder than I'd ever thought possible. "Then take him. But if you lay a finger on my mother again," my voice cracked, but I forced the words out, "you'll have to go through me first." The room erupted in laughter once more, but this time it wasn't casual. It was sharp, edged with mockery. One of the men closest to me leaned in, his masked face just inches from mine. "Through you," he sneered, his breath reeking of iron and smoke. "You're barely more than a child. What can you possibly do? My heart thundered in my chest, threatening to burst. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to disappear into the shadows. But I didn't. I forced myself to stand my ground, even though my legs screamed with weakness. Because I knew if I faltered now, if I gave them even a fraction of what they wanted, it would be over, not just for me, but for all of us. Behind me, I heard my mother's sobs, torn between fear and disbelief. "Please," she begged, her voice shaking. "Don't provoke them. They'll kill you." But Lorenzo's reaction was different. For the first time in years, his eyes shone with something I hadn't seen before, pride. There was pain there too, yes, and fear, but above all else, there was pride. He straightened, squaring his shoulders, as if my defiance had given him back a piece of the strength he had long buried. The Brotherhood leader raised a gloved hand, and instantly the laughter died. The silence returned, thick and heavy, pressing down on us like a weight too great to carry. He stepped closer, his boots echoing in the hollow villa, until he was just a breath away from me. Slowly, he lowered his head until his hidden face hovered at my level. His voice came out in a whisper so soft it nearly drowned beneath the storm outside, but it struck with the force of a blade. "Courage," he said. "A dangerous gift for someone so young. Do you know what happens to fire when it burns too bright?" I swallowed hard, but forced myself to hold his gaze, even though I couldn't see his eyes. "It spreads," I whispered back. A pause. Then, to my horror, the leader chuckled. Not the cruel, mocking laughter from before, this was something worse. Amused. Interested. As though my defiance wasn't an obstacle, but a spark to fan into something darker. He turned his back on me, suddenly, his cloak swirling with emotion. "Restrain them," he ordered his men, his voice sharp as steel. "The girl stays. She has potential." The words froze my blood. Two of the men lunged forward at once, grabbing Lorenzo and my mother. My mother screamed, thrashing desperately in their grip, while Lorenzo roared in fury, his strength straining against their iron hold. The sight of them being dragged, powerless and broken, tore something raw and primal inside me. I surged forward, my hands clawing at the nearest Brotherhood soldier, but he was too strong, his body unyielding as stone. He shoved me back, and I stumbled, crashing to the floor. Pain shot up my arm, but I forced myself to rise, my vision swimming. "Let them go!" I screamed, the words raw, tearing from my throat like shards of glass. The leader didn't turn. He walked toward the center of the room, his shadow stretching long and terrible against the flickering light. "Your father's debt was always going to claim him," he said calmly. "But you are something different. Your defiance, your spark, it could serve us, or it could destroy you. Tonight you decide." The storm outside howled louder, as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness to the choice being forced upon me. My mother's cries filled the air, pleading for mercy, while Lorenzo's furious growls echoed like a wounded animal. The Brotherhood men held them firm, their knives glinting, ready to spill blood at the slightest command. And me, I stood in the center of it all, trembling but unbroken, my heart torn between fear and fire. Every breath felt like a countdown, every second a step closer to a decision that would change everything. Would I surrender, bowing to them to save my family, even if it meant losing myself? Or would I fight, risking all our lives in the hope of breaking free from the chains that had haunted us for generations? The leader turned back at last, his hood dipping slightly as if in acknowledgement. "Well, girl," he said, his voice cutting through the storm like a knife. "What will it be?" The world held its breath, waiting for my answer. The world seemed to fall silent as his words hung in the air, a blade suspended over my head. My chest heaved, lungs aching, as if even the air itself resisted me. My mother's sobs echoed through the villa, each one like a dagger stabbing deeper into my resolve. Lorenzo strained against the hands that bound him, his teeth bared like a cornered wolf, the sound of his fury trembling in the rafters above us. And I thought of every moment. The years of watching my mother sacrifice herself in silence, bringing others to death. The way Lorenzo, broken by shame, tried to shield me with violence. Brotherhood, these faceless monsters who had and I will not bow." The Brotherhood froze. For a heartbeat, the silence was total, suffocating, the storm outside suddenly dim compared to the storm that erupted in this room. Then, like a crack of thunder, the leader's laughter filled the villa. It was not the mocking laughter from before, nor the amused chuckle. It was darker, resonant, carrying the weight of something ancient and cruel. "Defiance," he said, almost reverently. "How rare!" He snapped his fingers. 2 of his men lunged forward. My mother screamed my name, her voice raw with terror. Lorenzo roared, thrashing against his captors, veins bulging with the effort of breaking free. My pulse thundered in my ears, and instinct took over. I ducked the first man's grasp, adrenaline flooding me, my movements clumsy but desperate. The second soldier's hand closed around my arm, his grip iron, burning into my skin. Panic surged, but so did rage. I twisted, sinking my nails into his flesh, biting down on his gloved hand until the taste of leather and copper filled my mouth. He yelped, jerking back, and I stumbled free. The leader's voice cut through the chaos, calm yet laced with venom. "Restrain her, alive. She has chosen her path." They surged toward me again, shadows converging, and I darted backward, my body slamming into the villa's crumbling stone wall. My breath came in ragged gasps, but I forced my eyes to stay open, to lock onto Lorenzo's. His face, flushed with fury and despair, met mine, and for a moment, I saw not just my brother, but the man he had once been before the shame, before the silence. His voice, hoarse but unwavering, tore through the air. "Don't give in. Do you hear me? You're stronger than them." Those words ignited something deeper than fear, deeper than rage, something primal. My legs steadied, my back straightened, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a child standing in their shadow. I felt like fire. The Brotherhood men closed in, but I met them with every ounce of fury I had buried inside me for years. I clawed, I shoved, I screamed. Not with the voice of a girl, but with the roar of every broken promise, every stolen dream. The storm outside seemed to answer me, lightning flashing so bright it turned their shadows into specters against the cracked walls. Yet no matter how hard I fought, they were stronger. 2 hands clamped around my wrists, another around my waist, dragging me toward the center of the room. My heels scraped against the stone, leaving streaks of dust and blood. I kicked! I thrashed, my throat raw with cries that tore the night apart. But slowly, inevitably, they pinned me down. The leader stepped forward, his shadow swallowing mine. He crouched before me, his gloved hand tilting my chin upward until I was forced to stare into the black abyss beneath his hood. "You think defiance makes you free," he whispered, his voice like silk wrapped around steel. "But freedom, little flame, is an illusion, and soon you will learn that even fire can be smothered." A dagger flashed in the dim light, its blade gleaming like liquid silver. My breath hitched, terror flooding every nerve. My mother's scream shattered against the walls. Lorenzo's roar shook the air like thunder. And me, I closed my eyes, not in surrender, but in defiance. If this was my end, it would not be as their victim. It would be as the fire they could never fully extinguish. And then chaos. The villa doors slammed open with a force that rattled the walls, the storm outside exploding inward with wind and rain. Figures poured into the room, faces I could not yet see, but their presence was undeniable. Shouts erupted, blades clashed, and the Brotherhood's grip faltered just enough for me to gasp a breath of air that didn't taste of fear. For the first time that night, hope surged in my chest. Fragile, trembling, but alive. The storm had broken into the villa like a beast unleashed. Rain lashed through the shattered doorway, carried by a howling wind that extinguished candles and sent shadows scattering like frightened ghosts. My captors faltered, their grips loosening as they instinctively turned toward the sound. I stumbled to the ground, my palms scraping against the rough stone, but I barely felt the pain. My eyes were fixed on the figures who had invaded the Brotherhood's lair. At first, I thought the storm itself had taken human form. Their cloaks were drenched, their boots heavy with mud, but their presence radiated something that the Brotherhood's darkness could not swallow. They moved with precision, like blades cutting through the chaos, their weapons flashing in the dim light as thunder cracked overhead. The leader of the Brotherhood hissed, rising to his full height, his dagger gleaming as he pointed it toward the intruders. You dare!" His voice thundered, more furious than I had ever heard. His men rallied instantly, forming a jagged wall of shadows between him and the new arrivals. But the outsiders did not hesitate. The first clash of steel rang out like a bell of war, sharp and violent, reverberating through the villa's bones. Sparks flew as swords met, the air thick with the scent of rain, sweat, and iron. The Brotherhood surged forward with inhuman ferocity, their movements sharp and brutal, yet the intruders matched them with equal strength. It was as though light itself had come to war against the darkness. I crawled backward, my breath ragged, my body trembling with exhaustion. My mother clung to me, shielding me with her frail arms, her sobs mingling with the sounds of battle. Lorenzo, still bound, roared with fury as he kicked and twisted, desperate to join the fray, his eyes burning with both fear and fire. Through the chaos, I saw one of the intruders step forward. He pulled back his hood, revealing a scarred face and eyes that burned with determination. "We've been watching," he shouted above the clash. "We know what they've done to you." His gaze locked on mine, sharp and unyielding. "Stand strong. Tonight, their reign ends." Something inside me stirred at his words. My legs, weak and trembling, fought to rise. For so long I had been caught between terror and silence, but now there was a fracture in the darkness, a sliver of hope cutting through. The Brotherhood leader lunged, his cloak swirling like a phantom's wings. His blade cut through the air, striking one of the intruders and sending him sprawling across the stone. The others fought back viciously, but the enemy's numbers pressed heavy against them. The sound of steel against steel filled the villa, relentless, deafening. I clutched my mother's hand, forcing my body upright. "We can't stay here," I whispered, my voice trembling but firm. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, if we move, they'll kill us." But staying felt like death too. Suddenly, Lorenzo's voice ripped through the battle like lightning. "Greta! The chains, they're weak." My eyes darted to him. His wrists, raw and bleeding, strained against the manacles, the metal already splintering from his relentless struggle. His captors, distracted by the fight, hadn't noticed. His gaze locked on mine, fierce, commanding. "Help me!" My heart pounded so hard it threatened to burst. I let go of my mother's hand and stumbled toward him, dodging bodies locked in combat, slipping on the slick floor. The Brotherhood's men snarled as they clashed with the intruders, their faces twisted with rage. One nearly spotted me, but an outsider's blade cut him down before his eyes could widen. I reached Lorenzo, dropping to my knees. My fingers fumbled with the chains, the cold bite of iron cutting into my skin as I pulled, yanked, clawed at the bindings. My brother's breath came in harsh, ragged bursts. "Hurry!" he growled, his voice low, desperate. The sound of footsteps closed in. I turned, my blood freezing as one of the Brotherhood men loomed over us, his sword raised high. My scream caught in my throat, but before the blade could fall, the scarred intruder slammed into him, knocking him back with a guttural roar. His sword clattered against the stone, the sound sharp and final. "Go!" the intruder barked. "Free him!" With one last pull, the chain snapped, the rusted iron breaking apart like brittle bone. Lorenzo's hands fell free, blood streaming from his wrists, but his grin was feral alive. He surged to his feet, snatching the fallen Brotherhood sword and whirling into the fight like a storm-given flesh. My breath caught, a cry of both relief and terror bursting from my lips. For the first time that night, I saw my brother not as a prisoner, not as a broken man, but as the warrior he had always hidden inside. The villa shook with the violence of the clash. Shadows writhed, steel screamed, and the storm outside roared in unison with the chaos within. My mother clung to me as I dragged her toward the corner, shielding her as sparks and blood rained across the stones. And then I heard it, the Brotherhood leader's voice, rising above the noise, sharper, darker than thunder. "Bring the girl to me. Tonight, her fire dies." Every muscle in my body tensed. His words weren't just a command, they were a promise. And I knew as I clutched my mother close that this battle wasn't just about survival. It was about us, about our blood, our past, and whether or not we would ever be free. The night was no longer theirs. For the first time, it felt like it could be ours. The villa was no longer a place of power, It had become a graveyard for the Brotherhood's reign. The storm outside raged as though the heavens themselves had declared war upon these men of shadows. Steel clashed, thunder roared, and the air stank of iron and smoke. I clung to my mother, my heart hammering against my ribs, every breath a battle between fear and hope. Through the chaos, my eyes fixed on the Brotherhood's leader. He was fury embodied, his cloak torn, his blade dripping with blood, but his presence still radiated command. Even as his men fell one by one, he moved with the arrogance of someone who had never known defeat. His voice cracked like a whip, demanding obedience, summoning his remaining followers with a power born of terror. But tonight, terror had begun to lose its hold. Lorenzo was free now. My brother, bloodied and limping, fought with a savagery I had never witnessed. Every swing of his stolen blade was not just survival, it was vengeance, years of humiliation and rage pouring out in every strike. He cut through the Brotherhoods, ranks like fire-consuming dry wood, his roars of defiance echoing through the stone hall. The outsiders, though fewer in number, refused to falter. Their leader, the scarred man, locked eyes with me even as he parried a blow meant to cleave him in two. "Hold fast, girl!" he shouted, his voice carrying like thunder. "This ends tonight." For a moment, hope felt real. For a moment, I believed the nightmare might truly break. But the Brotherhood leader was not done. His blade found its mark in one of the intruders, cutting him down with a brutal slash. He spun, cloak swirling like a phantom, and his eyes landed on me. A cruel smile spread across his lips. "There you are," he growled, his voice thick with venom. "The fire in your blood will be mine." He lunged. Time slowed. The world blurred into rain and lightning, into screams and steel. I froze, terror rooting me to the floor as the shadow of his blade cut through the storm. My mother screamed, shoving me back with all the strength her frail body could muster. The blade came down, but it never found me. Lorenzo hurled himself between us, his sword raised. The clash was like thunder, sparks flying as steel bit against steel. My brother gritted his teeth, every muscle straining against the force of the Brotherhood's master. For a heartbeat, they were locked together, shadows and fire colliding in the storm's heart. "Not her," Lorenzo snarled, his voice raw, guttural. "You'll never touch her again." The leader laughed, a sound colder than the storm. "You think you can stop me, boy? You are nothing but broken chains." But Lorenzo was not broken anymore. With a roar that shook the villa, he twisted his blade, forcing the dagger aside. In one savage strike, he drove his sword deep into the Brotherhood leader's chest. The man's eyes widened in shock, his cruel smile faltering as the life drained from him. He staggered back, blood spilling down his cloak, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He fell. The villa went silent. The storm still raged outside, but within those walls, the war was over. The Brotherhood's men, seeing their master slain, faltered. Some fled into the night, others dropped their weapons, their shadows dissolving into nothing without the darkness that bound them. Lorenzo collapsed to his knees, his sword slipping from his hands. I ran to him, throwing my arms around his trembling body. He was shaking, his breaths ragged, but he was alive. My mother clutched us both, her sobs of terror shifting into sobs of relief. The scarred intruder approached, bloody but unbowed. He looked down at us with weary eyes, then nodded once. "It is done," he said simply. His voice was heavy with exhaustion, but behind it was something like reverence. "You are free. Free." The word echoed inside me, foreign yet beautiful. For so long, I had believed chains were my inheritance, that darkness was all our blood would ever know. But here, in the ruins of the Brotherhood's lair, with my brother alive and my mother's arms around me, I realized the truth. Their power had always depended on our silence. Tonight, we had broken it. I rose slowly, my legs trembling, but my voice was stronger than it had ever been. I looked at the intruders, at the storm, at the shattered villa that had been my prison. "This ends tonight," I whispered, repeating the words that had carried us through. The scarred man smiled faintly, as though he knew the weight of that vow. When the storm finally passed, dawn broke across the horizon. The first light of day spilled through the shattered windows, touching the stones with gold. It was fragile, quiet, but it was light. For the first time, I did not fear what morning would bring. The brotherhood was dead, and we were free.